Well, hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here to finally do my reading wrap up for the month of September. We're already, I think, 5 days into October as I'm filming this. It'll be 6 days into October when I get this posted. So, I just couldn't get it posted any sooner. It is what it is. We're going to go with it. So, I finished 7 books in the month of September, and it was kind of just the month of fine because of those 7 books, 3 of them were fine, and that's all. And then one I actively hated, 2 of them were good, and 1 of them was great. And let's get into it right now and go chronologically, starting with the one I finished first in September. Interestingly, I only have a physical copy of one of these books, and that's going to be the last one. So you're going to see a lot of pictures over here. So the first book I finished in the month of September was The Court Dancer by Kyung-Sook Shin, translated by Anton. And right off the bat, we're getting into one of the fine books. I think I had read one other book by Kyung-Sook Shin. Actually, I listened to both of them on audio, which is why I don't have a physical copy. The first one was Please Look After Mom, and then there was this one, and it was fine. So it's more of a historical novel. It's based on a true thing that actually happens. It's about court intrigue and a little bit about immigration and Korea, and a lot of the stuff that happens in it is interesting. I think it takes too long for things to get going. So the titular court dancer meets a man from Paris who is in Korea as an ambassador, and eventually she goes back to Paris with him. And it feels like that's when the book really starts to get going. However, that doesn't happen until you're already halfway through the book, maybe even a little more than halfway through the book. And a lot of the table setting that happens in the first half of the book is important later, but I still think that it really suffered from taking so long to get to the point. I think it could have been a little more streamlined in getting to that, because for a while it was starting to feel like, where is this going? And even after she ends up in Paris, it still kind of feels like it's not quite getting going, and that it's only really in the last third of the book that it starts to feel like the story has gained any momentum. And I think the book suffers for that. Kyung-Sook Shin is a great writer. Anton does a great translation. It's a captivating story in a lot of ways. I just think it could have been streamlined into something that would have probably been better and probably held interest a little more, and that ultimately would have stayed with me a little bit more, because it's not good and most of the detail, a lot, or at least a lot of the details, are kind of gone from your memory when it's only been a month after you finished a book. And that's kind of the place I'm in right now. You can see I'm kind of struggling to remember the details. I don't even remember the main character's name, and that's probably not a good sign. The second book that I finished in September is the one that I hated. It's The Bass Rock by Evie Wyld. And I have an up and down history with Evie Wyld as it is. And the thing that's really frustrating is I usually like at least the first half of an Evie Wyld book, maybe the first 75%. This case, it was definitely half. And after that, it all goes downhill. The one I had read previously was All the Birds Singing, which did a really great job setting up atmosphere and mood and tone. And I was really interested in seeing where it was going. And then in the last 25% of the book, I felt like it just completely devolved and did not satisfy me as a reader at all. And I got to about the maybe it's that I had that experience under my belt when I went into the Bass Rock, but I felt like I got about to the halfway point. I was like, this is not going to be satisfying. And sure enough, it was not. And again, Evie Wyld is a really great writer. So this has 3 storylines that trade off back and forth, and then woven among those are instances of violence against women that are perpetuated. And that kind of is the theme of the book. It's the ways in which women are treated violently by men over time, and ways in which women are resilient about it, and how even men who seem trustworthy can ultimately betray a woman in the end and treat her violently as well. And that part is interesting. But this book is it's deliberately unpleasant to read, and that's fine. So for the first half of the book, it felt unpleasant to read it, but that's what it's supposed to be doing, so it was fine. The problem is, So the storylines are one is much kind of older, where there's a village and a woman has been accused of being a witch. A young girl has been accused of being a witch, and a man and his son steal her away into the woods to try to get away and save her life. And the next storyline is roughly in the 1950s. A woman has just relocated to the same area of geography where the Bass Rock is, and we have a title. And she is a stepmother to two sons, and she is having a difficult time fitting in, and her marriage may be experiencing some difficulty. And then in the third storyline, which is basically the present day, the granddaughter of that woman is now at the house where she is spending some weekends helping clean up the house after her grandmother has died. And she is doing this as a favor to the family, but also the family is doing it as a favor to her because she has been through a lot of instability and had some problems and is having a really hard time readjusting. So those are the storylines, and then some of them are good, but then I also, part of this is that I also struggle with storylines where somebody just can't get their life together, and that starts to happen here, especially in the storyline that's most present, but even in the storyline from the 1950s. And it felt like every time the story moved around, I just wasn't interested so much. And I think the oldest storyline suffers a lot because you don't get to know the characters a lot. It's an interesting situation, but you don't feel involved in it at all. And the characters you spend more time with, it's almost like you get a little too much. The more I got to know them, the more distant I felt from them. And the ending, I don't want to give anything away, but it is just not satisfying at all to me. So that was really frustrating. And I had said at the time that I was going to spend more time reflecting on it, and somebody commented and said something to the effect of, once you've really thought about this book, you'll like it, basically. Once you've understood it, you'll like it. Well, here we are. I still don't like it, so sorry to that person. When it comes to Evie Wyld's next book, I don't know. I feel like with two of them under my belt, I don't think she's necessarily a writer for me, but I'm not closed off to the idea because I do think she's a great writer and has a lot of potential. And I know that her writing works for a lot of people, so I don't want to, I mean, if you like it, fine. It's just definitely not something I responded to, either one of her books, so. And I should say I had a copy of The Bass Rock on NetGalley, so thank you to Knopf for that. The next book I read was actually an audiobook that I listened to. It's The Night Swim by Megan Goldin. This was something that kind of popped up on my radar, and I just, as much as I struggle with mystery thrillers lately, I still enjoy the genre, and I like breaking up all my other reading with like a fun mystery thriller and something like that. So I thought, why not? I'll give this one a try. And it's one of the books that was fine. So the premise of it is that a woman who hosts a wildly popular podcast, it's kind of Serial-ish, if Serial had stuck with true crime like it was in the first season. And she's done 2 seasons, and now she is in the middle of making the 3rd season, where she is sitting in on a trial that kind of eerily calls back to the Brock Turner case. The defendant is a young man who is a swimmer, and they keep referring to his potential, especially as an athlete, and kind of denigrating the woman who has accused him of sexual assault. But as the protagonist, this podcast host, is sitting on the trial and doing interviews about this, she keeps getting notes from somebody who says that they had tried to apply or send a message to have a case that they wanted her to look into and had not gotten a response. And she's in the town where that person lives, of course. And she immediately becomes intrigued by that case and starts looking into it. And eventually that case ties to the court trial, of course. So aspects of the book are good. There are a little bit too many coincidences. Like I said, the fact that she ends up in the same town as this person, the fact that she is immediately interested in this case, despite the fact that this person is clearly stalking her to leave notes. She's just fine with that. And certain things like that. However, It was interesting enough. It was different enough. I think a lot of my problems with the mystery thriller genre right now have to do with the fact that everything kind of feels like Gone Girl, like kind of like a psychological thriller where the protagonist is unreliable, probably dependent on like alcohol or drugs or something like that, and the author is just deliberately trying to mislead you. And I really don't respond to that. And this book is a little more straightforward, which I appreciate, and that's why it kind of ends up in the fine territory. So that's The Night Swim by Megan Goldin. And then we get to one of the good ones. It's Alex Trebek's book, The Answer Is Reflections on My Life. And in a way, this you can kind of tell Alex Trebek had resisted the idea of writing a memoir in the past, and he was still not interested in writing a traditional memoir in any sense right now, because it feels like he sat down with a ghostwriter and told a bunch of stories about his childhood, about his early career, about Jeopardy, and his cancer diagnosis. If you're unfamiliar, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He is currently being treated for it. But you may very well know pancreatic cancer is no small issue. So he is also trying to deal with the fact that this could very well be a terminal diagnosis for him. And so parts of it feel a little bit fluffy, feel a little bit like it's not taking a memoir form seriously, but at the same time, a lot of it is really good and really interesting, and I think he makes a lot of interesting points about life and about death and about family, and so there is actually some surprising heft to the book. And of course there's some interesting dish about Jeopardy and how the things worked in the early days, and it's really interesting to get inside the head of a game show host, because he talks a lot about his approach to the contestants and how he handles being a host that you wouldn't necessarily think of when you watch Jeopardy, but which make a lot of sense once you hear him talk about them. The bulk of the narration is actually done by Ken Jennings. Alex Trebek kind of comes in and out, but what's interesting about the audio is they turn it into a conversation, which is kind of fun, and very different from other audiobooks. Like Ken will be narrating and finish a chapter, and then Alex will come in and say, "Hey Ken, you're doing a great job. I'm gonna take over for now." It's kind of interesting, and I appreciate the little bit of banter that they do back and forth. The physical book, however, has really great photos that go along with it. So I would recommend both. Really. What we did is my husband and I both listened to this on audio, and then because we liked the book and because he reveals at the end of the book, figuring that you have already purchased a copy, he reveals that the proceeds are going to charity. And because we had both listened to the book through a library app and didn't pay for it, we felt a little guilty, so we bought a copy. But we've loaned it to my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, and they are currently reading it. So that's why I don't have a copy for it to show you right now. The next book I read was another one of the good ones, actually. It's Wheels Up by Annabeth Albert. This is a romance book about a gay couple. They meet online on a kind of a dating app for military-type men to meet other military-type men, and they agree to meet in person and have a kind of wild night, and then complications ensue when one of them is assigned to the unit of the other. So one of the men becomes the commanding officer of the other. And what's interesting about the book is and what I'm kind of learning about romance, especially in the modern world, is that it really grapples with the relationship and their circumstances. It doesn't feel fluffy. It doesn't feel like a throwaway. It's not just about the sex. There is explicit sex in this book, but it's much more about the relationship. And the relationship is fascinating, and the things that they have to overcome, because, there's the very real fact that they are now co-workers, but beyond that, they could be court-martialed, especially the commanding officer could be court-martialed for their relationship. But also, there are the blocks that they themselves have put up to a relationship in the past, and they're struggling to accept things about themselves as gay men, and that's interesting to me. So I enjoyed this book, and I every once in a while, like I said with the Night Swim, every once in a while I kind of like to break up my reading. Romance is a genre I had not gotten into too much. In the past, I have read some gay-themed romance novels, so I can't count this for my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge. I'm going to do some romance books in other areas that will count for that, with the guidance of Kazan from Always Doing. But I enjoyed this one, and it goes to show that there are genres that I don't usually engage with that I can enjoy. So that was a good success. I enjoyed the book. Then I listened to the audio of The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich, and this was one of the ones that was just fine. I think it's a little bit too long, and I think there are a little bit too many characters. I think it's about a very important subject, and I think Louise Erdrich does some things that are really interesting, but she also does some things that kind of get in the way of the narrative a little bit, and that's kind of unfortunate. So I still like Louise Erdrich. I will still seek out anything new that she publishes, and I'm definitely going to look into more of her backlist, because if you follow along, you already know this, but just in case you don't, I absolutely love The Plague of Doves. If you have not read The Plague of Doves, go check it out. It's fantastic. Then I read The Roundhouse. Thought it was fine, just like this one. And then I read... There's Jamie coming back again. And then I read La Rose and just did not like it. So I'm kind of on a roller coaster with her, but I really want to read Love Medicine at some point, and some of her other ones. There was another one that somebody had recommended. I think Tracks came up as a recommendation in a couple of instances, and there was one other that I can't think of at the moment. But I enjoyed Louise Erdrich. I enjoyed parts of The Night Watchman, but not the whole thing. So it's just kind of ended up in that fine territory. Then we get to the one that I have, and the one that was great. It's Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi. I was a big fan of Homegoing by Gyasi. That was her debut. And if you have not read that one, so what's interesting about it is it takes two sisters in Ghana, back during the time of the slave trade, before the Civil War. One of them manages to stay in Ghana, and the other one is taken over the sea to the United States and ends up in slavery. Each chapter from there jumps ahead a generation and goes back and forth between Africa and the United States. So you see what happens to subsequent generations of their children. And one thing I've seen the book criticized for is that because you keep jumping ahead a generation, there are characters who will appear or be referenced in the next chapter, but there isn't really one character that forms a through line in the book, which makes it feel a little bit like a collection of short stories. But what the book does, and I think it's brilliant, is it shows the lasting impact of slavery and the slave trade on both continents. And it's fascinating. So I've been looking forward to reading Gyasi's next book for a really long time, ever since I read Homegoing. And here it is. It's Transcendent Kingdom, and this follows the story of Gifty, who has her parents immigrated from Ghana, and when we meet her, we know that there was some sort of separation. We don't know exactly what happened between her parents, but her father is not in the picture anymore, and we know that her brother had died of an overdose as a teenager, that he had become addicted to opioids, and then that unraveled his promise as an athlete. He had been like her older brother, who she looked up to, and also had a very promising athletic career. And her mother had gone into a depression somewhere around that time, and that caused Gifty to be sent back to Ghana with family until her mother could get back on her feet. Now, in the present, Gifty is a grad student at Stanford, where she is studying reward-seeking behavior in mice to try to understand. Basically, she's trying to understand her own family and addictions and how people can fall into depression. So her life has kind of come full circle. She's applied what's happened in her life to her studies. And now her mother is also suffering from depression. Again, she can't really get out of bed. The pastor from back in Alabama manages to get her on a plane and send her to Gifty. And now Gifty is a grad student trying to figure out how to help her mother, how to deal with the things that her mother went through, that her mother has never even articulated to her, but she could kind of witness as a child. And the story goes back and forth rather fluidly from the present to the past and all over. And it includes little journal entries from when Gifty was a child, and she would write in there thinking that she was keeping names coded, but when it was clearly obvious to anybody who would have read her journal that who she was talking about in the parts. And it's about resilience and trauma and pain and immigration and racism and religion and science, and the way I describe it is this book has a lot of threads and none of them get lost. It just creates this beautiful tapestry, and you can kind of pick out one thread at will and follow it and see where it goes. This is a book I could reread and think about a different angle that Gyasi includes every single time, and it would still be just as interesting. And it's about how all of these things impacted Gifty and made her the person that she is, and how she struggles with relationships, she struggles with a lot of things in her life, and how she's really good at other things, how she has manically pursued perfection in some ways, and in other ways just can't get things together. And she's a fascinating character, and there are a lot of things about this book that, especially as a white man who grew up in America, it's really interesting to hear about her experience, and so much of that seems true. And I just love this book. It is easily one of my favorites of the year, and I'm very glad I read it. And I'm even more excited to read another book by Gyasi in the future. I think this book could be a front runner for the Pulitzer Prize. I don't want to get ahead of myself, because you don't even get a long list or a short list for the Pulitzer Prize. It's just announced. So, and I haven't read some of the books that could potentially be in contention, such as Real Life by Brandon Taylor. Somebody had recommended Joyce Carol Oates' new book, and I think Joyce Carol Oates is someone who will always be in the Pulitzer conversation. I'm a little iffy on her work. That's the place I've come to after I bailed on Blonde. So I think this should at least win the Pulitzer. And if it doesn't, I think Gyasi is on track to do it at some point. But I really enjoyed this. I could talk about this at length. It's just been such a busy the end of September, beginning of October was kind of crazy in the world as well as professionally and other things. So I haven't had a chance to write down a review. I haven't. This was a buddy read with Erica from The Broken Spine. I'll link her channel down below. And fascinating conversations about this book, but I haven't really had a chance to put them together in anything other than me just kind of rambling about how good it is now. And hopefully it's at least helpful and interesting to you, because I hope that you would seek this book out and give it a try. I really love it. And also check out Homegoing, because again, that is a fantastic book. In terms of anything outside of the book world, what have we been doing? We just watched Expedition to the Edge and finished it. It was a fascinating show. I think we just watched the last episode of it, and it kind of ended abruptly, which was really frustrating. But it was a fascinating show. And what else? I've been rewatching The Mary Tyler Moore Show, which is my favorite TV show, just as like a balm in light of everything going on in the world, and that has been lovely. And yeah, so that's everything that's kind of been going on in September. Looking forward in October, I've decided I am not going to be doing Victober deliberately. If I have some time, I want to try to get a book in for Victober, because the one that I did last year was Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I absolutely loved. And it was something that I wouldn't have bumped up my TBR without Victober. So I don't want to lose out on that experience, but I also know that I'm doing a buddy read of Shuggie Bain right now. I'm still doing a buddy read of Love in the Time of Cholera, and a bunch of audiobooks that I had holds on are about to become available. And so I'm trying to keep a manageable reading life. And so I don't want to put too much on my plate right now. So if I get to something for Victober, cool. I also kind of want to, because of the time of year and wanting something escapist because of the way the world is right now, I want to try to do something Halloweenish, something thrillerish, something good for the season. So, I'm going to work on what I'm working on and see what I get to. And if that includes something that will at least nod to Victober, great. If that includes something that at least nods to Halloween, great. We shall see what happens in October. I am just going to deliberately keep things easy. To me, that's the way to do it. So, no deliberate plans. I am thinking about books that I want to fit in before the end of the year. So I will try to be doing a video about that. I need to do a video about another Q&A video, and from my last Q&A video, I found out I have a lot to say about potential tips for potential new booktubers. So I need to film that. Still have one last part of my bookshelf tour to do. And that should all be coming, as well as other things this month. So again, I'm trying to keep plans loose so I don't stress out. That's the best way to be. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you were reading in September, what you loved, what you hated, what you were indifferent to, and if you have thoughts about any of these books that I've discussed here, leave them in the comment section down below. If you have thoughts about like romance or mysteries or translated works, or you think I'm absolutely nuts for disliking the Bass Rock, go ahead. The comment section is down there. You know exactly what to do. And as always, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your patience with me not being able to get this out right away in the month of October, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.